Dead sea turtles washed up on shore, dolphins swimming through polluted waters, and birds covered in thick black oil. Those are just some of the images that are starting to emerge in the wake of a massive oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. The company responsible for the slick, BP, is now facing an enormous public relations battle. Calgary-based Syncrude faced a similar battle when images of oil-soaked ducks from its tailings pond went public. John Larsen is a principal with Corpin Group. It's a PR firm in Calgary that specializes in corporate crisis management, and he joins me in the studio now. Good morning.
Good morning, Jim.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
So what do you think of how BP has responded to this so far?
Yeah, it's a massive problem. There's no doubt about it. BP, generally they have done a lot of things over the past few years to try and get ahead of sort of the environmental curve and to do the right things. But this is a triple whammy for them. They blew up a refinery a few years ago down in Texas. They've had a leak up north, and now they've got this in the Gulf Coast. So in terms of what's happening from an emergency perspective for this company, it's not good. How are they handling it? Their spokespersonship on this hasn't actually been that bad. They've said some very good things. One of the things that some people could contend is that it needs to come from a higher level. We need to see more from the CEO. But the spokespeople generally have been very good. You can say what you like. At the end of the day, it's about action, and that's really what all the news is focused on now. Now,
the images that are starting to come out, and I mentioned some of them in the introduction. How do those images affect people's perceptions of this?
What it does, I think, Jim, is it casts the industry into the light that people are continuing to question the industry and where's the industry going. People are saying, how prepared is this industry? It's not just about BP. I think initially the story was about BP, and it's moved beyond that. And so that's why we're talking about it in Calgary. That's why people are talking about it in energy centers around the world. How prepared are companies? We see Conoco this morning even saying that they're going to hold off on an application for some Arctic drilling because they want to do better. Mm-hmm. You've seen the U.S. president say we need to do better. So it's much, much broader than BP, and I think those are the types of questions in terms of how do these companies really generate trust? How does that new narrative get some traction? Because they are trying to talk about things they're doing better, but people see this and they say, can we believe it?
Yeah. I'm wondering, too, what lessons can be learned from previous disasters. I mean, the Exxon Valdez is the one that keeps getting referred to. It's probably the only oil tanker in the world that people know the name of.
Absolutely.
And it's because of the images of those birds that were washed up on the shore of Alaska.
Well, it is. And I mean, Exxon, what do they say, 40 million barrels that were ultimately, or 40 million liters, that were ultimately released. And this thing, if it continues to flow to the time frame that they say it could before they cap this thing, it will far exceed that. It could be about 60 million liters. One of the things is, I think from an issue perspective, the environmental issue has just migrated so much further ahead than it was when the Exxon Valdez happened. Also, the way the media cover news stories, social media, public expectation, all of these things make the response so much different now than it was then. Mm-hmm. And companies recognize that, and they do have to step up to the plate.
But do companies recognize that? I'm thinking of the Syncrude case where they have been fighting in court all of the attempts at people to cast blame.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think every company deals with situations differently. One of the things that we've seen out of BP, as I mentioned earlier, is some relatively good spokespersonship. What they need to do is to continue this aggressive movement towards really taking action on this. And you see they're doing some new things today. Syncrude, they handled it a bit differently. They put a lawyer out in front. A lot of people say, why are you having a lawyer as a spokesperson? That's not exactly what we want to see. We want to see the CEO, or we want to see somebody that's working directly with the communities, talking about what those impacts are. Or the ENGOs or other groups. So everybody does it a bit differently, but I think generally there has been a trending towards recognizing the importance of the environmental issue. And certainly we understand why people would have been a bit skeptical of the new narrative that's coming out, but there are companies that are actually doing a lot of good things. Is it enough? One could argue probably not. There's a long way to go, but it's how they tell that story, and that story doesn't move unless you've got people's trust, and this doesn't help.
Now, the last time you and I spoke, it was regarding Toyota and their public relations problems, and you used a couple of examples that weren't even in the auto industry as companies that Toyota could learn from, Tylenol and Maple Leaf Foods. Could BP also learn from the example set by Tylenol and Maple Leaf Foods?
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up because Tylenol is an excellent example here because what happened with that company is they were actually the victims of that particular crisis, but they responded immediately. And the big thing that they did that I think BP can really learn from because they need to look into the days ahead is they took action in being a real thought leader. So as we look at this now, again, perhaps a little more from the CEO, who is that person? What are they saying about this? But what happens in a couple of months from now? How does BP try and position itself as not just a thought leader, but an action leader in the industry in terms of how we can do things better? And that's one thing Tylenol did. And within a year or two, they were at the top of their game. And public perception was very high.
So then rather than wait for new regulations to come in governing offshore oil drilling, get ahead of those regulations and, in fact, if possible, go further than those regulations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that happens in a crisis is that you tend to lose control. And we certainly see that with the U.S. president telling this company what to do now. So they need to gain that control back. They gain that control back not just by what they say, by what they do.
Thanks again for coming in this
Thank
morning.
you so much. It was a pleasure.
It's John Larsen. He's the principal of Corpin Group Incorporated. We'd like to hear from you on this. How do you think BP has handled its cleanup response? Give Talkback a call. The number is 403-521-6209 or send an email to eyeopener@cbc.ca.